you can be whatever on the outside, but your outside appearance is not what truly defines you.
Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent. Today, we're going back to the basics, to the core. We're going to talk about the phrase manifesting, and we're going to talk about how we connect ourselves to our core beliefs and values that are embedded in our gut. Because from there, we can begin doing the work to become the aspirational men that we want to be. So I'm excited about today's topic, Hugh and Gabriel, but welcome. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing good. And
Well,
I think this is a very important topic, and I'm very excited to dive deep into this and talk about all the many facets of it.
I'm excited as well, and excited to share a little bit about our stories and what we think regarding this topic. So,
excellent. Well, so today we're trying to explore the aspiration of what do we want to be as human beings. I was going to say, men, but I really want to elevate it to the human being level, because I think these attributes are things, these core values are things that we all share, whoever or whatever we are. But love to put a question to you guys and just say, if I asked you a question, Hugh and Gabriel, and maybe I'll ask myself this question as well, who are you? Who wants to take a crack at that heavy, deep question?
Well, I can try to go first. So I think when anyone's really asked that question, the first thing that comes to mind are these kind of external ideas or kind of your external looks, and what people first see when they look at you is kind of your outside appearance, maybe your face, how tall you are, what you look like, and that's what you can say what you are. But that's not what you truly are, because you can be whatever on the outside, but your outside appearance is not what truly defines you. And I think many people, especially in today's society, are very heavily focused on kind of this outside appearance defining who you are. And by them focusing so heavily on that, they really disregard internal soul and what really powers them to be who they are and their values. And I think what your values are is what is really important to you, and that's how you can really shape yourself as a person. And I think when defining yourself, I think your values and what you believe is what should come first, instead of using these outside characteristics that really have no true substance to them, but instead say things like kindness or empathy or understanding and like determination, things that are true characteristics of who you are and what you believe in.
I agree with you, Gabriel, and I think that a lot of people will put themselves down or will think, I guess, there's something they're not, if that's how people perceive them. So say if maybe you're not the fastest runner or something as simple as that, or you're not the strongest person, that doesn't set you apart from most people on the inside. It might externally, and like Gabriel was talking about, that's usually how people will define others. But that's not how I guess we should going forward, because no one no one is completely what they display externally, actually. I think that in certain situations people are forced to kind of comply with a set of rules socially or what they think. And I think that's what we consider to be the definition of socially constructed masculinity. I think that there are these restrictions that confine people to a certain way. But I think that if we kind of take control of ourselves and not listen to what other people are saying and how we should be or what we are based on what they see on the outside, I don't think that's who people are. I think we are what we are at our core. And like Gabriel was talking about, I think values should define us as human beings.
I think sometimes people who are, let's say, confused at their core or don't really have a solid foundation and at their spirit or soul, I think because they have that kind of lack of true understanding of themselves at their whole, they try to put so much kind of extra effort into this outside appearance to make it seem like they have kind of control internally because all they're doing is kind of adding on to this protection on the outside to not let anyone go inside and really see how they are at their true core. But by creating this excess layer on the outside and putting so much effort into this external view, they're making it so people can't really tell who they are on the inside. But I think people need to kind of revert that and learn that the external view and perception is not what truly matters, but it's the internal. But I think often many people get that confused.
So let's remind, our audience, Hugh and Gabriel are 11th graders in high school. And so therefore you are in the mix in terms of, a social environment, a structural environment where image seems to be so, important. And so let's talk about what you raised up, Hugh. You said that, many times you have to comply with the rules and deal with the restrictions, which confine, how you can express yourself. And there's a lot of control there. Can you guys give me examples as young men in high school of what some of these are and how they manifested in terms of how you have to present yourself?
I think it honestly is sometimes as simple as what you wear to school. I think that if people see something new or something that, you know, wouldn't expect to be what you'd be wearing or what other, I guess, boys our age would be wearing. I think there's a lot of judgment with that. And I think that's a very superficial way to look at it. And it's kind of, obviously, I don't agree with that because I think that in some ways what you wear can be an expression of yourself. And I don't think that people should deny us or what they think of us based on what we wear. And I don't know, because I just hear, I guess, say I would wear something new to school. You can kind of hear when you walk into school, maybe you hear someone saying like, "Oh, what is that?" That's not you, that's different. But I don't think maybe they don't realize that that's actually what you want to wear, and that's what I'm presenting there is what's coming from inside. And I think that's what we should be doing. I think we should be presenting an image of ourselves without those restrictions and without kind of those ideas of what are people going to say about this as we're kind of laying out our clothes or putting them on in the morning. You know, I don't think that should be a thought in your mind. I think that you should be displaying your true self, even when it comes to something as simple as that. So I guess that's just one thing that off the top of my head I can think of.
I agree with what you just said here and kind of going out of the box there. But I think also this kind of idea, when you think of some high school man or some high school teenager, a male, you think of some athletic, strong kid. And I feel like there's many kids or many boys in high school that aren't like that. But since there's this narrative that that's what you have to be at this age, I feel like they change who they really are to fit that narrative, and often by people kind of forcing themselves to kind of fit into that narrative, they lose who they truly are. And by kind of trying to fit into that narrative and being cool and being normal, they actually lose who they truly are. And I think it's important, especially at our age, to kind of widen broader sense of who you can be because you can be truly anyone or whoever you want to be. And I think it's really important for people to be very accepting and open of what you want to be. It's okay if you don't want to be some super athlete. That doesn't determine who you are at all. What determines who you are is what you truly value on the inside. And if you don't want to be friends with someone who isn't some super athlete, I think that is determining of yourself and that's an issue inside of yourself, but not the other person.
So you guys have raised a couple of great points that I want to come back to regarding the impact of conformity and the definitions of success. But I'll go back to the original question, and then now I will challenge you more specifically to please describe to me who you guys are, how you identify.
I can
And if
start.
if you want me to go first, I'm happy to start also.
I can start with that.
Okay.
I think that at my core, I do strive to be the best I can be. However, I think that sometimes I think laziness can hold me back, and I think that obviously no one's perfect, but I think one of the values that I think my mom has told me or that people have told me is that generally I'm a good listener, and I think that's helped me throughout life, listening to people, listening to experiences and struggles and seeing how I can relate to them. But also I think that I have an interest in language, specifically in the French language and languages in general. And I think one of my goals in life is to be completely bilingual or even trilingual. And I think having a good ear and being able to listen, even in that context, has helped me with that. So I think that's something naturally that I believe is at my core. I think that maybe it's the way I've grown up, but maybe it's how I was born. I think that I'm able to listen to people well and, hear where they're coming from. But obviously, no one's perfect as a person. And I just said that, in some ways I can be lazy. And I think that's held me back from achieving certain goals or certain aspirations. I think that that is that's also something that contributes to maybe my imperfectness. And I think a lot of people struggle with that as well.
Well,
But
one thing I want to challenge you on is use of the word lazy can have so many different meanings, right? Is in because you said a key word there describing it is it's something that is holding you back.
Mhm.
Now, is what holding you back, is it a fear? Like, for example, a fear of failure or fear of achievement? Is it, it can be so many different things. It can be, various causes of that hesitation because obviously you're working extremely hard
Mhm.
in different areas. But if you think about it more, could it be shyness as well, uncomfortableness with putting yourself out there? Is it something that you think with more confidence and experience that will sort of shed away?
Well, I think I'm generally an outgoing person, so I don't necessarily think that it's shyness. But I think, like you mentioned, it might be fear of failure. And I think that comes from expectations and, like we've been talking about, everything around you and how people expect you to be a certain way. And I think that sometimes it's easier to kind of stray away from the problem rather than facing it. And I think that's where the laziness comes in. You kind of sit back and delay the problem solely because of fear of failure or maybe something else. But I think that definitely failure is the probably the driving cause of that. And I
And
think,
well,
yeah.
and again, I'm going to jump in again. I'm sorry, Hugh, but when you say high expectations, are
hmm
those high expectations that you have set for yourself or others have set for you?
I think mostly it comes from me and how I look at myself because I think in general or at my core as well, I think I'm an ambitious person. I have been kind of striving for the best person I can be. I think that's definitely a positive value of myself, but I think that that also contributes to stress in some ways. And like you said, these expectations, and they might also, not even from society, but they might come from myself and how I see who I want to be. And we talked about manifesting and kind of what I manifest as or what I manifest myself to be. So I think that definitely the expectations or most of them are coming from myself. I don't think that I generally have people around me pushing for, telling, or I guess in terms of that, like my parents or my family, I don't think most people are pushing at me, telling me I need to be something. I think that it comes from myself. And maybe partially I think my siblings and my parents are high achieving people as well, or ambitious people as well. And I think maybe it has to come from that as well. But I think that most of it comes from inside and how I want myself to be.
Well, thank you for being so, honest and open there about, you know, how you identify. That was, just remarkable to listen to. Thank you. Gabriel?
Yeah, so I think for me, who I would say I am is I always try to be very empathetic of others and try to put myself in other people's shoes. But sometimes I feel it can be hard to connect to other people if you don't really have those same experiences as others and you're not in the same type of experiences, even though you can try to connect. So I think this idea of connection to other people is always very important and always trying to listen, even if you're not talking to them, like you mentioned earlier, just being able to give them that ear. But I think, as you said as well, this idea of expectations often burdens me down. And I do agree. I think it can come from internal expectations of myself, kind of be this high achieving person and this ambitious person who I try to always strive to be. But I think also these kind of expectations also come from society and who I would say us as these um teenage males who are supposed to be and what you're supposed to be. So even if they do come from internally, I think there's also always this kind of set of external expectations. And if you want to kind of do something that kind of goes against these external expectations, I would say there's always a pretty stern and heavy wall. And if you do want to go against it, it's not you can do one push and go against it. It's a very consistent effort on trying to go against it to actually be successful in kind of striving away. Let's say you don't want to do like the common job that every guy is supposed to do. You want to do something different. It's not just one easy way and you can just turn around and do that. It's and often a lot of actions, the continuous actions that you have to take to kind of go in that opposite direction. But I think when more people are learning that it's okay to kind of be different, and myself included, it's okay to not be the same as everyone with that kind of internal soul and internal spirit that I have. I think once you really understand and gain a deep understanding of who you are at your core and who I've tried to do my entire life, I think that's when you can really learn that it's okay to kind of be different and go on a different path. But I think myself, it has been hard to kind of stray away. But I think once I've kind of continued to do these actions, you learn that not everyone is the same and it's kind of okay to be different.
Gabriel was talking about how people are confined to certain maybe jobs or aspirations in their lives. And I think that a lot of that comes from money and the need to make money, or in a sense, be the provider in that socially constructed way. And I think that that holds a lot of people back because I hear sometimes maybe I'll be talking to my friends and I'll hear that um, most of them will say like, I want to go into finance, and maybe you do want to go into finance, and maybe that's something that obviously takes a great deal of work and passion, but I don't think that 80% of people are, I don't think that in 80% of people or 80% of my friends, I guess that's an estimate. I don't think that 80% of them want to be that. And I think that that comes from expectations, from money, from being the provider in a sense to, and I think that it holds people back from displaying who they really are. Yeah, so I just say that that concept of being the provider and being the one to make money. And I guess in finance, there are a lot of stable jobs in finance, and I think that in that way, people are kind of drawn to that, or even other high-paying jobs that they might not necessarily be that interested in, because I think that's what society has made them interested in the most.
Yeah, so it's so interesting. The conversation starts with trying to identify who, you are, at your core descriptions. But with both of you, it's quickly morphed into, how do those, core elements of who you are, how to navigate the real world that you guys are living in. And it seems like that world is filled with struggle and potential conflicts, right, on a daily basis. Can you guys raise an example? And if you need team time to think, I can dive into an example that I have in my head. But can you think of an example where you've had to do sort of an inventory of who you are as a person, and then how do you manage that conflict in a real life, situation in terms of how do you, act or present yourself?
Well, I think I can go first of kind of who you are and kind of connecting it back to this aspirational masculinity. And I would say maybe let's say I'm in a locker room with some of my friends and they make a joke, right? Something that might be seen as something so small, so insignificant, when in reality it's not. And then when one of my friends says that joke, I have to kind of reflect on who I am and what am I gonna do? Am I gonna do what my soul tells me to do and actually stand up and be like, hey, that's not right? Or kind of pretend like, oh, I didn't hear it or it doesn't matter. But I think in that moment, I chose, I was like, okay, I realize that this is wrong. And it might seem small now, but that small joke can slowly spiral and spiral into something so much bigger. But people will never realize that because it just started out as some small joke, when in reality, it's not just that small joke. So I think, so then I would step in and say, hey, like maybe not in public in front of everyone to not really single him out, but take him to the side after he made that joke and be like, that's not cool. Why would you say that? Like that's gonna cause such a bigger effect than what you think, and that's not what truly happens. So just don't say that. And that small conversation can really stop so many future events from happening and spiraling into something so much bigger. And I think that's why it's so important to really stop it at its core and to realize that your soul should always and your spirit should always be reflected in your actions, even something so small. And you should never really let your outside kind of people or your outside environment really change or take away from your soul and your spirit.
So
When,
like,
well, quick question. When you had to make that decision, what was the process in your mind? I mean, you obviously must have gone through an inventory of what are the risks if I do this. Was it a very practiced feeling because you had thought about that scenario beforehand or heard it before and said nothing and regretted it? What sort of was going on in your mind as that scenario was playing out?
Well, I think when that scenario was playing out, I've obviously thought about it, but I think the idea of thinking about it, then it actually happening is very different. And I think people are often like, okay, yeah, I can do this when they're thinking about it. But when it's actually happening to you in person, and it's not like you have maybe 10 minutes to reflect on it, it's kind of this split second decision. You have to really make sure that your values always align. So I just had to, I feel like the risk that you're taking to really like speak out is shouldn't really be a risk because it should be something that people should always do. So I kind of thought of that as it's not really a risk. Like it's only risk for the other person to realize if they're saying something against me, like that's an issue with them and not with me. So I kind of realized that in my head as I was thinking about what to do. So then after I would step aside to the person to not try to make it seem like some big thing to other people and then step it aside so it wouldn't happen again in the future. So it can kind of stay at that smaller level.
So
Oh,
awesome. You just brought a live example of manifesting, which we introduced as a topic, but I was remiss in defining it. Manifesting, the act of making something happen by imagining it and consciously thinking that it will happen. And, I love that example, Gabriel, because, you did think about it. You might have been through that scenario before and you manifested it. Made it happen by imagining it and taking that conscious action.
Yeah, and just going back to that one idea of manifestation, and I know I talked about this in an earlier episode. I didn't exactly say the words manifestation, but I think the idea of kind of positive reinforcement and what you really think can really influence what happens, like this idea of manifestation, because I think if you're always being negative and you're always thinking, oh no, I can't do this, I can't do this, or I'm too scared to really speak out, that kind of leads into the idea of manifestation, but in a negative way. So it'll never work out. But I think if you have this kind of constant positive reinforcement, even if it's about nothing that has to do with aspirational masculinity, maybe a test. If you're thinking, okay, coming into this test, you studied a lot, but you're saying, oh, I can't do this, I can't do it. During the test, you might blank and you might not be able to do it. But instead, if you have this positive reinforcement, okay, I studied a lot, I know the material, you come to the test, you do great. It has nothing to do with aspirational masculinity, but still, it's this idea of manifestation that can be applied in so many areas of life that I think it's so important for our viewers and our listeners to realize that manifestation doesn't just come in one way in life, it comes across
And
in
and
many
and that is
aspects.
significantly powerful in terms of the intersection of aspirational masculinity, meaning understanding your core and that ability to manifest, right?
Totally.
Because that connection is where great things, good things happen. So I think that's important for I think us all to understand and why it's important to do that work to identify. And maybe everyone should even write it down on a piece of paper. I've written it down here in terms of my characteristics, but write them down on a piece of paper and read them and write them down again and again until they become sort of easy to recite in terms of who am I as a human being? Who am I as a man? How do I want to be known? I want to be known as the good man that I think I am. But that goodness can only be reflected in terms of how you then carry that in your daily life in terms of your interactions with others.
Totally.
Hugh.
okay. So I was going to talk about going back to the question about how maybe something has held you back from manifesting or thinking about what you really want to be. I would say that I remember this experience, I think it was in sixth grade, and I remember talking to my friends and saying, that I had developed a recent interest for acting and possibly trying to act in a TV show, a movie, or becoming an actor. And I just remembered the backlash that I got from that. And even from my own friends who I thought, were loyal and supporting of who I am or who I was. I think that that held me back ultimately from kind of achieving that dream because I never really beyond that point kind of had that interest or it kind of withered away in some sense. And even to my life now, I think that it's interesting, but I don't have that same spark or that same interest. And it was kind of stopped right at its core, right when it was beginning to develop. And I think that it's kind of really disappointing or almost devastating because, maybe it was something that I really wanted to do at that time or that I would really develop an interest for. But I think that even my friends' kind of denial of that also showed that the expectations that they have for themselves and for men in society. And I think that to them, it might have been maybe embarrassing to have friends who weren't the same macho man figure, even in like sixth grade, which is interesting because, that to see how early that develops. But I guess that was one experience where something was stopped at its root and something that never fully developed. And it's kind of sad to see it.
I am so sorry that that happened, Hugh. I think you would have been a great actor in Hollywood, and don't lose that dream. Well, so now my turn. If I had to describe myself, I would describe myself as being someone who is sensitive, someone who is emotional, empathetic, and caring, I think are deep in my nature. And I think at my core, I'm a very loving person. I have a need to love. And I also think I am a joyful person. I'm probably at my greatest comfort when I feel joy. And so that is something that I've felt, if I had to describe who I am at my core. But just as you guys have said, and as I'm listening to you, there's so many examples in my life where I feel like the as you say, Hugh, the armor has been built, chain by chain inside to say, you know what? The fact that I can cry almost on demand and I love to be super expressive and ride these emotions, I need to start confining them because my peers don't act like that. And, anger is the one emotion that is allowable for young boys and men. The sensitivity bit, I definitely had to turn down, and I found it very confusing at home. It was a wonderful attribute to have, but outside of home, where the insults would come, that sensitivity could be a severe weakness, right? Because you feel the pain and hurt when someone calls you a name. I grew up as a half Japanese, half Irish guy in New York City, and a lot of, words were described, thrown at me in terms of my Japanese side. And I'll give one example at work. So when I was 22 years old, graduated college, went off to Japan to work in investment banking for one of the large, big American firms. My boss pulled me aside after maybe the first 4 or 5 months of working there. And she was an American woman who was there, and she thought she was doing me a wonderful favor. She pulled me aside and said, Alex, you're smiling too much, and your colleagues here in the office believe that you're not very serious or you're not very hardworking, right? And she was concerned about my reputation. So that's why she said it to me. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I love the word you used, Hugh, when you described your sort of acting aspirations. I felt the same feeling. I felt devastated. And, I really had to make a decision there. Me as a person, Alex Prout, do I disappear in this moment and complete that sort of chain armor that I was being told I needed to build to confine, who I am in this setting? And I had to do a very quick inventory in my mind. I still remember that moment clear as a bell. And as I was thinking about it, I found myself asking questions, and I don't know really where I found the courage to ask the questions to a very senior boss in the office. But I said, do you have a problem with my work output? The answer was no. Do you have a problem with my work ethic? No. And just, asking those questions somehow gave me a little bit of courage. And it made me even stand up more upright. And I said to my boss, well, for me to have a smile on my face represents the energy that I bring every day. And I'm afraid if I don't bring that energy, I'm not going to be able to perform like I've been performing. I need to have that passion in what I do. And I decided consciously there, I was not happy afterwards. I was so sad internally that people are talking about me in a disparaging way because of my appearance. But somehow I just said, you know what? I'm not going to let this defeat me. Now, I was at a very different stage, Hugh. I was in the work field, and this is a serious topic. If I conformed, I would just be a robot in that environment, and I probably wouldn't have lasted. Because honestly, I didn't have that much interest in quote unquote finance at that stage, especially investment banking. But it led to a 35-year career in working cross-border finance between the US and Asia. And what I found was I could not lose myself. I had to make a decision there. Could I lose myself or not? I wasn't going to be who I could be if I lost myself. And I look back to that day, and especially now hearing what you said, Hugh, it scares me to death how close I could have been because everything and everyone around me wanted me to conform. Lose that smile, become a gruff, serious guy in that office because a male-dominated office. And that would have left me devastated and I would have shrunk and I don't know what I would have been today. Right. So it is awesome that you guys are experiencing these things now in a safer, environment. But it does make me sad. And that's the sensitive and empathetic side of me, Hugh. I hope some point in your life you grab that dream again, right? Um, just to know what, half of our dreams, I wanted to be a pro baseball player when I was your age, but obviously that didn't happen. And I wanted to be a cook. So I find my outlet, in other ways now. But getting back to the core message is, we have to live our life every day in difficult circumstances. And if we let, you know, outside opinions and thoughts and norms guide us, and people on the podcast, you can't see me rocking back and forth in my chair. I'm just, visualizing or trying to feel just being blown by the wind at every moment, right? Versus understanding this is who I am, whether I like it or not. This is my identity. And the world wants me to be the best person that I can be, right? The world wants each one of you guys and each one of our listeners to be the best person that you can be. But we do need to recognize there's so many forces that are saying conform, right? And how do we reach that balance? That's really, the question at hand, right? How do you reach that balance? But that also tilts me to the thought of leadership, right? Because the world needs leaders to set the new examples. Why is the example that, hey, you need to conform to this outdated, irrelevant, and possibly wrong concept of masculinity? Right?
I completely agree. And I think these kind of internal ideas that you were talking about, I think if we go outside in public and we ask 50 people to come up to us and ask, hey, who do you think we are? Like, what do you think our internal values are? I think the vast majority would be, I don't know, no emotion or stern, strong. And I think that so many people take that, and because that's what kind of males are supposed to be, but that's not what they really are. But so many people are just like, okay, that's what society wants from me, so that's what I'm gonna be. So many people lose their sense of kind of wanting to be this sensitive, empathetic person, but they lose that all because society has this kind of conformity that you have to be this strong, like no emotion, very angry, stern person. And because this is what society kind of has created, so many people are scared to really go against this and they just conform into that. Whereas I think it's so important, as you said, Alex, that people really need to accept who they truly are and don't let people saying, "Oh, don't smile that much." and actually instead stay with your true values and be like, no, I'm gonna smile because that's how I smile and that's how I express myself. And not let other people take away from your true values and who you are at your soul.
I'd also like to say that I don't think there should ever be in society this idea of what you should be, because no one no one is really what society has boxed in this idea of a man. And I think that people need to realize that. I think people need to realize that people can be what they want to be, no matter, you know, who they are. And I think that a lot of what holds people back is, like we've talked about, it's all comes from societal expectations, along with many other factors. But I think that that is probably the main one that might have held me back from maybe being an actor in some way, or that, you know, I don't know. And I think that it's important to recognize that people are who they are and they shouldn't be changed, because that they are who they are for a reason. And I don't think it's necessary to ball someone up and change who they actually are, because that won't prove to be successful later parts of their life. Because I think that if you're doing something that you don't want to do, you're never actually going to be good at it, or you're never going to produce, good results. But I think that if you're inspired to do something and if you're excited to do something, I think you'll achieve your goals in that, and you'll manifest what you really want to become.
Wise words from both of you. Thank you. So I'm going to sort of guide us towards the end here today with a quote from a New York Times review of the play Our Town, which is just a new version has premiered on Broadway of this old classic by Thornton Wilder, which is an amazing sort of adaptation of the play. But in his review, the reviewer said, if you are lucky, you will have valued above all price the smallest events of daily life, so that you will not feel cheated when forced to give them away. And I read that quote this morning before we jumped on the podcast. My wife and I just went to see the play in New York City. It is amazing. Kenny Leon has just done an amazing job with this his version of Our Town. And it's a story about small town America and death, and speaking to people in the afterlife about their regrets and how they live their life. And that's what he's talking about when his Thornton Wilder's desire is for you not to feel cheated when you're forced to give away what you were able to experience in the living world. And, this is really about an opportunity for us to be the best and fullest versions of ourselves. We all know, or we should know, who we are at our core, because we're all beautiful, wonderful beings. And who we are at our core is also something that connects us to every single other human being in this world. And, we use words like happiness and successful, but many times society's definition of happiness and successful is like a heavy anchor around our ankles, right? Preventing us from doing the things that we want to do, because society says that's not the definition of a successful man. That's not the definition of a happy man. But I think each one of us has this inherent in ourselves. And I think so many of our issues of conflict, our issues of unhappiness, the issues that we face in our daily life can be blown away by us just all going back to our core and doing a little bit of that thinking, because it'll allow us to see the beauty in others as well. If we understand our own internal beauty, it should help us see the beauty in others and help us connect in a more productive way. But with that little spiel at the end here, any last comments from my co-hosts?
I think one last thing to wrap it up is, as this quote just said, the importance of these small events and to not really take them for granted and to really cherish these small events when they're not really that small and not let them go by so fast, because when you don't have them anymore, you'll be sad that you kind of lost them because they went by so fast.
So what could we each one of us do today? And I challenge our listeners to also do it. What one small thing would each one of us do today, preferably near after we're done taping this podcast? What can we do to reflect and connect who we are and one of those small events out there in the universe?
I would say every action, make sure that that reflects who you truly are. And maybe after you do some small action, maybe write it down and explain how that action reflected who you truly are. To
So
really
what would you do, Gabriel?
maybe, let's say you were talking with your family members and they said something, maybe because they're a little older and they're kind of not in that same context of what's appropriate and what's not. You kind of say, hey, you shouldn't really say that, and really say what you should say instead, and kind of maybe go back and write that in a journal or something, and just making sure that and how you reflected that in your true soul.
I think that one last phrase I would say is also just be guided by who you are, because I think that will take you to ever who you want to be. So I would say stick to your values and yes, be guided by who you are.
I think for me, what I will do today after I am done with this podcast, I am going to give my youngest daughter a hug and tell her I love her and how much I appreciate her. I will send text to my two other daughters who are geographically more distant, and I will tell my wife I apologize for being harumph yesterday in the afternoon when I was tired and we were doing some chores, and how much I enjoy spending, time with her. So that is a wrap, my co-hosts. Another interesting conversation. Hugh and Gabriel, thank you so much. For the members of the Aspire team, I want to thank our audience for listening, and we look forward to joining you next week. For now,
Thank you
take
everyone
care.
for listening.
Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about our student and executive programming at our website at ihavetherightto.org.